All right. Are you working your butt off? I don't know. I am. Everybody's working their butt off right now. We're striving, we're moving up, we're moving around and through whatever that corporate ladder that you were on. And maybe you're feeling burnt out, frustrated, tired of the hamster wheel when you're trying to manage all of it, the work, the life, the family, the fun. And it can seem impossible, but it does not have to be. So my name is Maryann Lombardi, and I'm a career coach and the founder of Find Your Fit. And in today's video, we are going to speak with fellow career coach Eric Grorud about why you need to know why you work and how knowing it is the gateway to easing the grip that work has on every part of our life and managing this thing that we call work-life balance. So let's get started and bring Eric on in here. Hey, Eric, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Can you tell me, really, because it's not just us, I want to know too, why it matters to know why we work.
Sure, sure. What you just described, I call never done careers. You could work 24/7, 365 days a year. And so many of us are in those never done careers. And if we don't know why we work, we let that become a 24/7 job. And so knowing why we work and what we want to do with our life outside of work creates the space to limit how much we work and take control back.
I love this idea of never done careers. Can you unpack that a little bit more for me? How did that come to be?
I think we all were taught early in our careers to say yes, right? We were taught that the way to get ahead is to say yes. When somebody comes and asks you if you can do something, yes. And so we keep saying yes. And at the end of the day, we don't stop because we're through the to-do list. We stop because we just get tired. One of my mentors told me a story where his wife asked him this very question: how do you know when you're done? And he's like, honestly, it's just when I get tired. So tired, I stop. Really changed my thinking, even though I kind of had been in that situation forever. It's just like, hey, if that's when we stop, can we move that dial?
Yeah. Yeah. So why then is it hard for us to figure out why we work, right? It seems sort of logically like this would be a simple equation, right? We sit down and we go like, why, what the heck is going on, right? Why do we want to do this? But it's so difficult to really understand that why. Why is it so difficult?
At least the people I talk to, I think, have this tendency to answer it with this sort of surface level answer. Oh, I work so that I can have a nice house and I can support my family and do the things I like. You're like, okay, did that actually have any meaning? Like, what is, maybe the house, but other than that, it was just sort of a token phrase. And you need to go down deeper than that and really figure out what is it that brings you some joy. Can you define what you do now to make yourself feel happy now, as opposed to, oh, I'll be happy when I get that promotion. I'll be happy when I get that next major milestone.
Yeah, I don't know who started the whole 5 why thing. I don't know if you go through that 5 why where you ask people, okay, the first level of why is what you're saying. It's like a house and to, be able to afford things for my family. Okay, well then why is that house and being able to afford things for your family important? Well, because X, Y, and Z. And then you go, well, okay, then why is X, Y, and Z important? And you work your way through as many whys as you can get until you get to that nugget that is actually the reason why, which seems really far from the surface answer that you're talking about is I want a house and, be able to afford things for my family.
Yeah, I don't always use 5 whys, but it is there. It's hidden there, right, in the conversation. I think people get a little frustrated when you do it exactly that directly, but absolutely that notion of just pushing. I also usually try to branch it out a little bit more, right? And thinking a little bit about yourself, your financial, your health, your personal health, your hobbies, and trying to get some of those different things so that it's beyond others. And a lot of people tend to define that and never really talk about themselves, right? Their own health and wellness or personal goals and things like that. They tend to talk about it. Oh, my family, I want to be there safe for college, right? It is always about others. And sometimes we need to remember the self-care part of that as well.
So how did you get started doing what you do now? Was it at all this journey about figuring out why you work?
It was, back in, I think it was 2018, I hired someone like you based on that same conversation and hired a coach. And what we started with was not my career. It was starting with what else matters. He had me do a vision board. I don't know if you've ever done one of those. I am an analytic person by nature. Like he's like, Google it. He's like, this is the only thing I'm going to make you do that I will just tell you have to do. And it was, and he's remains a friend, coach, mentor, and we've even done reciprocal coaching since then. But it was helpful for me to think about what are those things that matter in my life outside of work, and really to think about that and think about how do I, what when I define why I work, how do I make sure to include those things?
Yeah, so you went into coaching. What led you into this field specifically?
I think it was even from when I started talking to him, I realized I always loved working with people. I worked in consulting, big consulting firms for years. One of the favorite things I did was work with people on how, where they wanted to go. I used to love to ask them what they wanted that next promotion. And in that same spirit of your five whys, that's like, why do you want to be a partner in a consulting firm? And they kind of look at you like you're nuts. You're like, well, because that's the destiny. I'm like, but why? Right. And really pushing on them. And in many cases, people really didn't have a good reason, or when they thought about it, I'm like, is that really what you want to be doing? Is that what you love doing? And so I always loved that. And so it became more and more of my job. And in all honesty, it's always sort of valued in the corporate space, but not valued over the other things I was supposed to be doing. And so I realized that the job I had wasn't really the job I wanted. And so during the pandemic, took an opportunity to step away and really focus on, building my own career in a way that allowed me to both pursue my why outside of work, but also make work more fulfilling.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that with your clients, you find people who, once they figure out that why, it changes the kind of career progression that they, may be looking for. I know I have this client where we went through this process, and she was sure that she wanted to be some C-suite kind of gig because it felt like that's what she was supposed to do, right? Like she was carrying all the other weight of every woman who's like, of course you have to be in the C-suite. But she would look at people in those positions and be like, well, that looks miserable. Why do I want to do that? And one of the most fun things I think I do is helping people make a lateral move, right? Like, because it wasn't about going up, it was going over, right? She was really like, how do I solve the problem of maintaining some level of seniority as well as a salary that I need, but also to step away from a certain path that just doesn't seem fun or interesting or allow me to have the quality of life I want. So I imagine you end up having clients who come in thinking what they want is X and then discovering what they really want is Y.
Yeah, it definitely happens. And there's a weird thing that happens in some firms, which is you hit a certain level and they start to become flat organizations. Consulting firms tend to have partnerships, law firms, others, and I tend to work in that space. And they hit this level and unless they want to run the whole firm, which is, one of 1,000, isn't really the path for them. And so sometimes it becomes they've hit this sort of level of executive, and it's not clear if there is another path or if they even want it. I remember a fascinating situation when I was right below sort of the partner level in a consulting firm, and I was working for someone. He said, "Hey, do you want my job?" And I was like, "Of course." He's like, "It's funny. You're the first. I've talked to 10 people, and you're the first one who said yes." Right. And then he'd just taken over the org, which is why he's having these conversations. But it can be, people don't all want the same thing, and so frequently I find people have hit a point and they're just like, "I've had a great amount of success. I'm not sure," to the point of they might have a little inkling. Maybe I don't want that next one, but I want to feel successful still. I still want to feel successful, but I need to sort of take control. I've hit this level of success. I want to feel successful, but I can't just keep working harder and harder. Going back to that concept where we started, the never done job, the people keep asking me to do more. I'm not even sure where I want to be 5 years from now. And if I don't know that, then when they come and ask me, how can I even answer the question? Right. And so I just keep saying yes, because I don't know where I want to go. And so for me, helping people get to that, hey, what do you want to be 3-5 years, depends on sort of what their mental horizon is. And how do we work towards that is really helpful. Right. And it's to the point that you talked about. Sometimes you realize a lateral move is great. Sometimes it's just a different phase of work that a company's in.
Yeah. How do you navigate the conversation around trade-offs, right? Because in making anytime you make a choice to do something, you're also choosing to not do something else, right? And so there are trade-offs that exist within the conversation. And so how do you have that conversation with clients and help them navigate, like, how do they decide sort of, or really understand what the trade-offs are once they discover what they want and then that path to go get that?
It's funny because you used one of my things, which is we are, everything is a trade-off, right? Like as you said, right? Just that, and I love that question, which is just if you say yes to this, what are you saying no to? And often, and so often, it's getting back. It's the personal side. If I say yes to this, it's less time with my family. It's less time, right? What it might be saying yes to more income, but the question is, do you actually need that? Is that really why you're working, because you need more income, right? And so I think it's interesting, going back to our original premise, is it's much easier to have that trade-off conversation when you've got some firm why you work goals.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start to talk about, well, how is that going to help you reach those goals, right? These never done jobs, people tend to think, oh, I have to carve out personal time. I like to try to flip that discussion. How do we set up why you work and block that time, and then let work fill in? And so when you think about trade-offs, you're not carving out time for your personal. You're carving out the rest. You're carving out almost time for work. And so when you're making a trade-off, the trade-off becomes really clear what it's going to have as an impact outside of work.
I love flipping that idea of what time you're carving out, right? Like that's really valuable to think about, because you're absolutely right. We're all thinking about work first as the base, and then we're fitting everything else around it, as opposed to like, well, there's the life thing, right? Like life is it. We got one, it's the thing, and it's, the work's job is to serve the life that you choose to live. So it is flipping that idea of where you're carving out time. It's such a wonderful reminder of that. Are there clients that you think about, or a client specifically who had a really interesting sort of aha moment or journey in figuring this out?
Yeah, I think they all do at different points, right? When you start to, I was working with one client who started his own business, right? And talked about everything that was important to him. And we would, at the beginning of the year, we set these goals of what he wanted to do, and it involved, and we talked about the personal goals. And so then we said, oh, he's like, okay, I need to take a trip to India to see family over in India. And I'm like, okay, well, is it on the calendar? He's like, no, I don't, it's going to be this fall. I'm like, when? I said, okay, let's get it on the calendar, right? And he was just like, oh, I said, once it's there, you schedule around it. But if it's just sometime in the fall, before you know it, your fall, there's all these weeks you can't do it because you've got something. And it was just like this change in him. It's like, why would I, but I don't know the exact date. I'm like, well, let's just take a guess. Like, maybe those become the dates. Let's actually do it, right? And the number of times when I have this conversation, we start to think about those. We start putting things on the calendar in the actual conversation. I'm like, no, either that, or we discuss, after you're done, put it on and I want to text, right? Like, just because it's so easy to let, again, everything fill in. And so usually when people start doing that, they see the change that can happen, because, as I remind them, whatever you're doing could be another client you're working with, right? People are like, oh, I've got to be accessible. I'm in client service. I have to always be accessible. I'm like, well, what do you do when you're with one client and other calls? Can't always be on the phone with everyone.
Yeah, that's such a great reminder. Sometimes it's just as simple as that, right? Like make the time, like put it on the calendar, block it off, and then it's there and it's done. It doesn't need to necessarily be more complicated than that, which is great. I would imagine that what you want as somebody entering their career, or maybe earlier in their career, in their 30s or something like that, and what you want when you're 50, maybe an empty nester or something like that, would change, right? I'm curious how one navigates that shift, right?
Yeah, I will fully admit that I tend to work with folks who are a little bit, mid-career and later. But even reflecting on it myself, I can tell you when I was in my 20s, going out and single and going out with friends, like why I worked was I made sure I was done at 5 on Friday because we were going out Friday night. I'm like, nobody wants anything after then. Friday night, I got very used to asking clients, when you say close a business Friday, do you really mean start a business Monday? And the answer was almost always yes, right? So it's like, so the activities with my friends, I didn't mind working. I didn't mind working in the mornings on Saturdays because I never did things with friends then. But so my priorities and what I was trying to do, right, it change, and I think that's true of everyone. And I think as there's different stages of life. Why we work isn't a static concept. It's although I think it slowly evolves. It's not overnight. Possibly with the exception of kids going off to college and things like that. And then all of a sudden, there's sort of probably a window of time that you need to make sure it doesn't go back into work, right? Hey, I used to go attend my kids' sporting events or performances or recitals. Now I don't have to do that there at school. The key is to find something else to put in that time and not let that never done job just go and suck up that time.
Yeah. So what can we what can we help people do like right now? Like what are things that individuals can, when they're thinking about this and they're watching this video and they're going, okay, yeah, that sounds great, but I don't even, what do I do? Right? Like, how do I start? Is there something that we can give them to do like right now that can start this process?
Yeah. I always like to find some small things that people want to do that are small short-term goals that are relatively easily achievable, whether it's depending, it could be starting like, hey, I'm going to go for walk the dog for 20 minutes 2 days a week, right? And just carving that time out, you put it on your calendar and you say every morning, Tuesday and Thursday I'm going to go walk the dog, or obviously you have to have a dog or just walk yourself, but is trying to find some of those small things and starting to build a little bit over time, right? When I started, that was one of the things I started doing when I worked with a coach, but a lot of times it's unhealthy. It could be, hey, I want to do one date night a month with a significant other. It could be, like if with kids, attending their sporting events, but not doing hey, I want to go to all my kids' sporting events. It's just not realistic. Set like a goal like 75%. I want to get to 75%, and then start monitoring that and saying, hey, I'm doing that. I'm excited, right? Like I'm happy that I've started to take this control. And over time, you can add things into there. You get a little bit longer term things like adding some vacations and putting those on the calendar months and months in advance, even if you don't have the plans, just so that they happen. But I think starting with these sort of small wins starts to give you some of that control and block it on the calendar so that you don't carve it out later. You just avoid scheduling on top of it.
Yeah, and I love that advice because it not only does it get it on your calendar, but it also gives you a tracking mechanism, because often what we think is happening and what is actually happening are out of sync with each other, because we just don't quite understand. And so often what's great about putting it on the calendar, writing it down, is that when you start to think, I'm not doing this, I don't have enough time, I'm all this you can go back and you go, well, look, actually, this is what you did this month. You actually went to 70% of your child's activities. You actually did walk the dog twice a week. You actually did do a date night every other week, with your partner. You did do all of those things. And it helps to sort of settle the rumination that often comes in when your brain is either, emotionally responding to something, right, in a way that gives you something tangible to look back at.
Yeah, you hear, oh, I can't find the time. It's like, well, because you've decided that work has first preference on the calendar, right? And the ultimate goal is to realize that work isn't the first preference on all the time, right? Is that you find those things that you are really important to you, get them out there, and not everyone needs it on the calendar. I will fully admit that almost everyone I work with will talk about how their calendar rules their life, and it's like, well, if that's the case, then you need to be putting personal things on your calendar, because otherwise you're carving them out and you're skipping things and you feel like you're failing at work, as opposed to, oh, I just didn't let something get scheduled there.
Yeah, that's super helpful. One of the things that I've started doing, because I have the problem of, and I think this might be an entrepreneurship thing too, is that you're never done, right? Like you always have more that you can be doing. And so understanding what success looks like and what accomplishment looks like can be hard on a day-to-day basis. And so I have a process where each week, like I will write down sort of like the big accomplishments, but like the daily, what's the top thing that was accomplished that day? And sometimes it's personal, sometimes it's professional. And so when I start to get in that spiral, I look back, and this is like written, not in the calendar. And I look back and I go, okay, all right. So it may feel like I haven't made the kind of progress I want, but when I look back at the sheet, I go, okay, well, look, I mean, you've been doing all of these things that lead up to that thing, which have, grown this and built that, and so it helps me settle a little bit that, how do I know if I'm succeeding? How do I know what success looks like? Well, success is just progress, right? So here's the record of your progress.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I came to mind when you said that is that for many of the people I work with on a day-to-day basis, it's not like they really have a boss. They may, if they're an entrepreneur or they're independent as an executive enough that nobody checks in. And it's almost like what you did was write hey, here's the status report of what I accomplished last week. And even if it's just for yourself, it is amazing. And I've had that happen. I'm like, God, I just got nothing done. And then you sort of write down, you're like, no, I got a number of things done that, this week, but not everything shows up as a revenue number or even anything in a work context. It might be, hey, this was the week my kid took the SATs and I was there. I got up on Saturday morning and drove them to the SATs and then picked them up so that you didn't have to drive. It can be, but recognizing what you've done, because I think sometimes we look for those big, hairy, audacious goals and things like that. And you're like, okay, but what are the small things? Because we really actually make progress with small things.
Yeah. And I'm a big data person, right? And so I love this idea of what we measure matters, right? It's the things that we measure, the things that we count are the things that we know that we think matter. If we count it, it matters, right? And often some of that intangible stuff around our personal or life goals are harder to count, right? They're harder to measure. And so for me in my brain, I'm always trying to find a way to make sure that I am, quote unquote, measuring them by noticing them and identifying them and intentionally doing that, because I know like it helps me think about what I measure matters, right? Like what I measure matters. So those walks with my dog, they matter, right? Because I'm measuring them. I know them. I can think back to doing them, the calls I have with my kid, all of those kind of things, like what I'm measuring matters, right?
Yeah, no, I think specific, you're right, and that's why when we talked about why you work and getting it down to those levels of why, getting it to, and it's not because I'm trying to create a scorecard, but there's a difference between saying, hey, I need to be better about my health, and saying, hey, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week, 10 times a month, and you quickly go as an analytic person that doesn't match, and that's the grace I give myself because I know it's not always going to work, right? Is that you set goals that are achievable and reachable, not goals that are, if I don't hit them, I'm failing, and like it assumes perfection. But having metrics that are achievable to me is always really helpful. But having those metrics is important, because if you don't have them, like you said, it's hard to sense whether or not you've accomplished it. And not everything leads itself that way. But for me, one of them is taking 2 vacations a year, like 2 1-week vacations a year with my family. Like it's a pretty easy measure, right? But if you don't actually create that and just say, oh, I'd like to go on vacation, then you're not sure whether or not you succeeded or not.
Right. And then to your earlier point, you're just trying to shove it in at the last minute, which isn't great either. So how can people connect with you and continue this conversation? What is the best way to reach you?
So, I'm on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to reach out to me, or my website is nextdecisioncoaching.com. Either one, you can schedule a link or just engage in conversation. I try to provide some of these little stories in sort of a LinkedIn blog that also ends up on my website, but that's probably the best way to reach out. But, even if you're just interested in conversation, I love to talk about these things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I thank you so much for spending the time to have this conversation with us. I think it's super important, and I'm excited to see what questions come out of it for our audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Maryann.
Absolutely. So everyone, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can learn how to land your dream job and how to access that hidden job market and so much more. And I'm going to see you in the next video.